When I was just a tiny tot of about 7, there was a local amusement park not far from where we lived. This park hosted an annual event known as Gourdland, always scheduled for the Saturday before Halloween. The place would distribute candy to children while they transitioned between rides, and pumpkins were strategically placed around the area for families to choose and take home. This was a day I anticipated all year long. One memorable year, when I was still in my soccer phase, we planned to head straight to Gourdland right after my game. They had a fun little perk where kids would get extra treats for coming in costumes. So there I was, donned in my quintessential Spider-Man outfit. My parents were taking me and my 2 sisters. Upon arrival, my sisters immediately lobbied to hit the haunted tunnel ride first, followed by the bumper cars. They wanted the thrills up front. My mom and my sisters settled into one of the haunted tunnel cars, which only accommodated 4. My dad agreed to wait with me so we could take the next car together. Just then, my stomach churned with nervous anticipation, and I felt an urgent need to use the restroom. We stepped out of the queue, and my dad guided us to the closest facilities. He also had to go, but I was done before him. I waited outside, growing increasingly anxious as time ticked on. When he didn't come out, I rechecked the restroom but found it empty. Anxiety turned into outright fear. I was surrounded by a bustling crowd, and at that tender age, the fear of being lost was incredibly overwhelming. Soon, a man approached me, and inquired about my parents. I told him I couldn't find my dad, and he offered to help. His grip was firm as he led me through the park, pulling out an outdated flip phone to make a call. "Yeah, I'm with him now," he said to the person on the other end before hanging up and telling me that my dad was waiting in the parking area. Something seemed off. I knew for a fact that my dad didn't own a cell phone. How could this stranger have called him? Besides, my Spider-Man mask concealed my identity. As we drew nearer to the park's exit, a sense of impending doom settled in. I knew I had to act. When I spotted a female park employee, I started to call out, "Excuse me. Excuse me," until she noticed me. "I don't know this man," I blurted out. The stranger tried to defend himself, but the employee immediately took my side. She led me to her station and used the loudspeaker to locate my parents. Within moments, my dad appeared, frantically waving his arms. My mom joined shortly, both horrified to learn about the close call I had just experienced. They asked to review security footage, only to find out the park didn't have any cameras installed at the time. We thanked the vigilant employee and tried to return to a semblance of normality for the rest of the day. But the weight of what had just happened only hit me years later, giving me a sickening realization of the danger I had narrowly escaped. When my parents decided to jet off to Europe for a vacation, they didn't think I was responsible enough to manage the house alone. So, they sent me to my Uncle Dave's sprawling farm, where he lived with Aunt Liz and their son, David Jr. The farmhouse was a grand, vintage wooden building, replete with creaky stairs and a certain old-world allure. I was given a guest room on the upper floor, which had a panoramic view of the farm's expansive cornfields and the artfully made scarecrows that Uncle Dave took great pride in. It was the middle of October, a crucial period for harvesting corn. Uncle Dave requested our help, and much to my surprise, I actually found the labor enjoyable. There was something therapeutic about the process of picking corn manually, placing them in the baskets we had on our backs. My attention, however, was also caught by Uncle Dave's scarecrows. They wore different outfits, jeans, sweatpants, flannel shirts, and had straw hats that partially obscured their faces. Intrigued, I asked Uncle Dave about the scarecrows, how long it took him to make them, and whether they were effective. "Takes me just a couple of hours for each," he said, scratching his stubble. "And you bet they work. Haven't seen a crow for days." That evening, David Jr. and I indulged in some video games and even shared a joint. Eventually, I retreated to the solace of my room, intending to browse aimlessly on my laptop. Just when I was settling in, a rock hit my window, once, then twice. My heart jumped, and a sense of dread enveloped me. Was it a figment of my imagination, intensified by the weed? I hesitated but mustered enough courage to pull aside the curtain and look out. The fields were bathed in the ghostly glow of the full moon, and that's when I saw it. One of the scarecrows was waving its arm at me. Unable to contain my fear, I rushed to David Jr.'s room, but he was already snoring. I thought of waking up Aunt Liz and Uncle Dave, but decided against it, not wanting to be the laughingstock of the family. I retreated to my room, lifted the blinds just enough to peek out and watched the scarecrow for a solid 5 minutes. Nothing. Perhaps I'm just high, I thought, and eventually went to bed. The next morning, Aunt Liz was busy making pancakes, and the sound of Uncle Dave's tractor indicated he had already started his day. As David Jr. and I sat down for breakfast, he remarked, "You seemed rattled last night." What was it? I hesitated but then spilled the story. Aunt Liz chuckled and blamed it on the weed. David Jr., however, took a more serious tone. "I've always felt there's something not right about those scarecrows," he said, almost whispering. Unable to hold back our curiosity, we decided to investigate. We closely inspected each scarecrow under the revealing morning light. It was David Jr. who noticed first, the mud stains on one of the scarecrow's boots and a distinct handprint on the shirt of another. Even Uncle Dave was puzzled. Then, suddenly, we heard giggles and laughter from the other side of the cornfield. We turned to find a group of local teenagers, one of them holding a scarecrow hat. It turned out they had been sneaking onto the farm to move the scarecrows as a prank. Uncle Dave gave them a stern warning but decided not to involve the authorities. From then on, every time I visit the farm, Uncle Dave jokingly asks if I'd like to wave back at the scarecrows. We all laugh about it, but deep inside, I always make sure to maintain a safe distance from them. Because you never really know, do you? It was a crisp October evening, the autumn leaves painting the world in shades of fiery reds, vivid oranges, and golden yellows. Autumn had always captivated my heart, so when my boyfriend, Mark, suggested we go camping in the woods near his mom's rustic cabin up north, I couldn't resist. The cabin, traditionally a winter getaway, was laden with all the necessary camping gear, sleeping bags, portable stove, and a spacious, 6-person tent. We parked our Jeep at the cabin and then, laden with supplies, ventured into the dense woods to find the perfect camping spot. We eventually stumbled upon a picturesque clearing, surrounded by tall, ancient trees whose leaves formed a multicolored canopy above us. The clearing was large enough for our tent, the fire pit, and some room to spare. We quickly set up camp and built a roaring fire. We sat next to it, exchanging old stories, eating campfire-cooked hot dogs and marshmallows, feeling the warmth of the flames dancing in the cool autumn air. As the night unfolded, we felt the temperature drop, and decided it was time to retreat to the tent. But we kept the fire going, its light flickered against the tent fabric and offered an additional layer of psychological comfort. Mark and I curled up inside our sleeping bags and started talking about future plans, and how amazing it would be to bring our future kids here one day. Then, a new noise broke into our intimate conversation, the subtle crunching of leaves somewhere off in the distance. Mark held a finger to his lips, signaling me to be quiet, his eyes wide and alert. Typically, fires keep most animals at bay, but the noise that continued sounded uncannily human-like. Two-legged. Methodical. The footsteps grew increasingly loud until they stopped, unsettlingly close to our fire pit. The fire's light threw the shadow of a person onto the wall of our tent. The figure appeared to take a seat in one of our empty camping chairs, silhouetted but unmoving, not speaking a word. Feeling bold, or perhaps reckless, Mark slowly unzipped the tent and stuck his head out to inspect. But there was no one there? He emerged completely, flashlight in hand, scanning the darkness that surrounded our campsite. Still, nothing. Confused, Mark crawled back into the tent. "There's no one out there, Emily," he assured me. But as he spoke, I still saw the shadow on the tent wall, a man-shaped outline sitting calmly by the fire. "Then explain that," I whispered, pointing to the wall. Mark's eyes widened in disbelief. He scrambled back out to check again. Empty chairs greeted him. He turned back to me, his face pale. "We need to get out of here. Now," he said, urgency lacing his voice. Grabbing my hand, we left the tent and began a frantic run through the woods, hearts pounding. The air seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive, and we heard a disturbing, guttural groan that seemed to come from just behind us, followed by the sound of something, branches, leaves, crashing. We screamed, fear injecting speed into our legs. We only found our way back to the cabin by the sound of our car's horn, thanks to Mark mashing the lock button on his key fob. Once inside, we locked every door and window and huddled together in the bedroom. Mark insisted on staying awake while I attempted to sleep, but rest was elusive. He later confessed that he thought he heard faint scratching at the door, though he couldn't be sure if it was his anxious mind playing tricks on him. Dawn eventually broke, its morning light a stark contrast to the terror of the night. With trepidation, we returned to collect our belongings. Everything was as we'd left it, except for one unsettling detail: the camping chair where we had seen the shadow was now overturned. We didn't speak much on the drive home, each lost in our thoughts, replaying the inexplicable events of the previous night. Our camping gear remains stashed away, untouched, as neither of us has any desire to repeat that harrowing experience. And so, that autumn night became a tale we seldom speak of, a chilling memory kept locked away, much like the camping gear we've vowed never to use again.